work is a relationship for people, and that if you want people to give their best, if you want people to stick around, if you want people to be committed to you, then that check-in isn't just about checking in on their KPIs or their performance. That check-in is about checking in with the human, building relationship, showing interest, expressing appreciation, all of those things that are vitally important to us as humans in our relationship with others.
You're listening to the Happy Space podcast, where we achieve performance through inclusive design. Today, we talk about the work check-in meeting and answer the question, are these necessary or just wasting time? With leadership trainer, Jason Lauritsen. Tension continues between some leaders and their staff about the way work needs to get done. It seems that neither side understands each other. Both my next guest, Jason Lauritsen, and I believe that if we had more good conversation, we'd move towards better understanding. With that, we might then achieve my hope of compassion-infused compromise and sustainable constructs of work. Jason is the author of 2 books, Unlocking High Performance and Social Gravity. He's concerned that we simply expect relationships to happen rather than devoting energy to cultivate them. In this episode, we talk about a key offering in his work, the check-in, something that leaders need to take responsibility for as a cornerstone in relationship building. Find out what he thinks of a leader who declared that he would rather leave his people alone and let them do their work. And learn the 4 critical ingredients for a successful interaction that is guaranteed to build a relationship. Welcome, Jason Lauritsen.
Thanks for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since I met you at the Work Human Conference. And what was so amazing was watching your talk sell out twice. Right? And I was almost waiting for another third Jason Lauritsen room. And your topic there was about the importance of having a regular check-in as a team leader with your staff. And I wanted to really deep dive into why that's important, why you think it was such a hot topic at Work Human. Can we start there?
Yeah, well, yes. Hardest question. You and I, we talked about this. I'm not entirely sure. I have speculation about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because, number one, as people are emerging, I think, into whatever this next reality or next normal of work is going to be, right? We're still sorting that out. One of the things that I thought was palpable, and I'll be curious if you felt the same way, but I felt, and I heard a lot of conversation about, people are really concerned about kind of 2 key things. One was keeping their employees connected, feeling connected. They're worried about disconnection and loneliness and all these different things, especially in distributed workforces, hybrid workforces.
Yeah.
And they're concerned about how we're going to effectively retool our managers to manage performance in this new distributed world. I think managers and leaders that have been around a long time are having trouble getting their arms around how to do this. And the answer for some of them is try to pull everybody back into the office, which is very short-sighted. The longer, the better answer is we need to retool. And the check-in done effectively, at least the way that I talk about it, is a solution to that. It was a conversation on this simple tool that can help you accomplish both of these things. And so I think it was just like, hey, I have a pain point over here. I have a pain point over here. And here's one session that's going to speak to both of those things. So I'm guessing that's what it was. Who knows?
Yeah, I think you're onto something for sure, because I think we connected recently on LinkedIn where there was a post where a leader was saying, oh, I don't have this check-in, regular check-in. You don't need it. If your people are doing fine, you're just wasting their time. And what are your thoughts on that? And then I want to get more deeply right into what a check-in ought to look like.
Yeah, well, I think I love, on the one hand, let's parse it out. Like, I love the idea that as a leader, because I was a leader and am a leader like this. If you're getting your work done, I'm not going to get up in your business about it. I'm not going to micromanage you and how you're doing your work. I create an enormous amount of flexibility and freedom. And so I think that was what his intention was. I think that's where it was coming from. But what he was missing was that work is a relationship for people, and that if you want people to give their best, if you want people to stick around, if you want people to be committed to you, then that check-in isn't just about checking in on their KPIs or their performance. That check-in is about checking in with the human, building relationships, showing interest, expressing appreciation, all of those things that are vitally important to us as humans in our relationship with others. And so that's where I think he was missing the mark, is that I think it was well-intentioned, but short-sighted.
There's a lot of short-sighted, I think, going on in what we're talking about now. Do you think that has anything to do with, I think there's something about the hustle culture and the need to just always be responding, that we don't actually reflect on what's needed in the moment. Do you have further thoughts on that? Like, why are we not looking more deeply?
Well, yes, I think it's even bigger than that. I think hustle culture is probably one of the culprits that exists in certain industries and certain places, is really highly valued. But I also think that more broadly, I don't know, let's call it 20 or 30 years ago, we had a shift kind of towards efficiency, right? Really, if you think about it, I was just talking to somebody not long ago who talks about, he used to train, Six Sigma black belts and, all of that kind of era of maximum efficiency, which is like every minute we're going to turn into a little production nugget. Yeah. And the problem with that is that we squeezed in again, well-intentioned, but we squeezed all the social space out. We squeezed all the reflection space out. We it's like we put our organizations in one of those kind of vacuum sealers and just sucked all the space out of it. And that has had consequences. That has had consequences for the human beings that are stuck inside that bag. You can't breathe. Turns out, suck all the air out, you can't breathe.
The beautiful analogy. And I think it continues the erosion of our ability to connect as we digitize all these experiences and self-checkout and stop even the small social lubrication that we had. Do you think that's at play too? And maybe even some social reluctance to having these check-ins from a leader point of view, and maybe also even from an employee point of view?
Yeah, I think there's certainly, I don't know if it is. I think in some cases, certainly there's a reluctance. I think I would say it's more born out of, my experience has been that I think it's more, I don't know how, or I've lost my, either I've lost it or I never had it in the first place and then it got worse. But I don't know how to have these conversations. And I think we weren't probably super skilled broadly as managers, leaders, even just broadly as employees within organizations on how to have meaningful conversations or how to have meaningful check-ins pre-pandemic. Then we all got thrown into a bunker, into solitary confinement for a while. Yeah. And we're separate. And then we are coming back together and we're shocked that our already weak skills have atrophied. And so I do think a lot of this is it's a skill thing. And I think it's also, sometimes we forget what's good for us. I know that happened for me, is you forget how important some of the stuff is. And you have to kind of be put in the situation where you're like, oh yeah, that feels like sunshine on my face after being in the dark for a long time. And then you recognize, oh yeah, that's a core need I have that I really need to attend to.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's making me reflect right now. I left my marriage in 2016, and within my marriage and my kids living at home, there was this always social connection happening. And I left and my kids stayed living in the house with their dad. And I realized pretty quickly I was lonely. And it took me a couple of years to figure out that I needed to schedule that in. And so, yeah, then I went to India actually, where I traveled and I connected with my family. And there's so much social connection in that culture, especially around family, and in a lot of cultures that I think in North America in particular, with everybody being so scattered, we don't have that social circle. We don't have that, as you say, we were weak before the pandemic. I mean, even so much so that Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General in the US, right? He's talking about an epidemic of loneliness. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're right. The ingredients, if we just go back, it wasn't good enough. So we need to actually design for what's happening now, taking into account what we've been through and where we were. So I would love it if you could share a little bit about what you think needs to be in a check-in, how often it needs to be, what are the key requirements, what's the tone and energy you bring to it? How do you make the check-in a successful cornerstone experience in somebody's work life?
Well, it's, there's a lot of different things we could talk about. I think the most important part of it I have found is you just, at risk of sounding flippant or oversimplifying things, you just have to do it on some level, and then you can get better at it over time. I think sometimes when we talk about these kinds of things, we tend to load a bunch of pressure on like getting it just right. And it's like, it's not about getting it just right. It's about stepping into it. To your point with relationships in general, one of the things that I think is really interesting and is counterproductive for us is I think particularly US culture, we've sort of, we have this almost kind of romantic or magical notion about relationships, that they should just sort of happen, and that they will, the good ones will just kind of happen and things. And, you hear people talk about, what's the secret to a good marriage? And they're like, it's work. You got to do the work, And I do think in general, across the board with relationships, we've forgotten that a good relationship doesn't happen by accident. You cultivate it. And the way that a gardener puts in an enormous amount of work to cultivate a great gardener, the same thing is true about relationships. And so that is what I would say here is the first step is just do it, step into it, be courageous to have the conversation. And then the most important thing, and you saw, this is what I teach most regularly. It was kind of one of those moments or one of those things that I stumbled into a bunch of years ago, and I started using, and then I started teaching, and just have been overwhelmed by the power of it, is that an effective check-in boils down to 4 very simple steps. And if you understand these 4 simple steps, then you can have an effective check-in anytime, anywhere with anybody, as long as you're willing to step into the conversation and just be present and intentional about it. And so here's the 4 steps. Number 1 is ask a great question. And that is, this is the very first step. And this is the step that most of us screw up, because Claire, when we check in with people, what is the most common question that we ask?
How are you?
How are you? And then people say,
fine.
Fine. And you now know nothing. It's
Yeah.
like saying hello. People do this on the sidewalk. How are you? I'm good. And then away we go. There's nothing. The person asking, how are you, is not making a sincere request. The person responding is not responding in a way that is inviting a conversation. And so it's just a transactional, hey.
It's
and off we
basically,
go.
I've noticed you.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, it'd feel awkward not to say hi, right? That's kind of how it almost, you're right. And so ask a great question is about asking a question that helps move us into a conversation, because the purpose of a check-in is to have a conversation that matters. And so a great question is a question that the answer to this question demands a follow-up.
Yeah.
So you ask a question that you can't walk away from. And so the simplest example of this that I offer for people to start with is taking how are you, which is not a great question, and making it a great question by simply adding a little bit. You say, how are you today on a scale from 1 to 10? 10 being couldn't be better, 1 being couldn't be worse. And then you'll say some number between 1 and 10. Whatever that is, it would be pretty weird to walk away from that, right? So someone says a 2 or a 7 or a 9, like you're like, now you're in it. They've
Yeah.
just opened a door for a conversation. And so a great question then draws you in. So now you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. You just said you're a 6. Sounds like some things are going well, maybe not ideal. I'd love to hear what's been going well lately. And then we're into it. So step 2, I just demonstrated, is ask the follow-up question. So step 1, you ask a great question. They're going to give you an invitation to step in. Then you ask the follow-up question, which is just a curiosity question. Tell me more, right? Be curious. And then step 3 is the other step that we tend to screw up most frequently, which is if you go to all the work to open up this conversation, step 3 is shut up. It's listen. Listen, not just to what they're saying, but listen to what they're not saying. Listen to how they're saying it. Listen to if you're with them, facial expressions, all the things. Pay attention, be curious. You can continue to ask follow-up questions, but really, really listen, because if you've done this right, they're gonna give you some really incredible insights, and it will happen within the first 30 seconds that you're having a conversation with them.
Yeah.
And then you keep following up until you get to step 4, which is when you're done. And it might be 5 minutes into it. It could be 2 hours into it. Doesn't matter. You offer support or encouragement, depending on what kind of conversation you've had. And that can be as simple as saying, how can I help? What does support look like for me, for you today? That kind of thing. And off you go.
I love it. It weaves in, absolutely, is the precursor to what do you need to succeed? The support. Like the support conversation, right? But this is the part that people, I think you're right. I think they don't know how to do it until you've tried it and it's actually come out of your mouth a few times. It feels like you're using somebody else's words. You're uncomfortable. There's somebody in my family actually who's going through this right now and has not had a check-in with their supervisor properly since they started. And it's now months. So now it's gone beyond okay, I was kind of nervous about it. Now it's like, oh, what do I do now? Because it's gone for so long. It's how do I even start? And I said to her, I said, you need to have a brave day. You just need a brave day. You just need to try it. And it's real important.
Today's episode of the Happy Space podcast is sponsored by ClareKumar.com. With sensitivity, curiosity, and courage, I serve 3 groups asking the tough questions that lead to meaningful answers. Number 1, I coach ambitious leaders to design for well-being and achieve next-level work-life integration. Number 2, I mic drop thought bombs, that's bombs as in BALMS, in keynotes and workshops, helping organizations achieve the business imperative that is inclusivity. And 3, I collaborate with brands concerned with respect for well-being on product design, marketing, and PR. If any of this piqued your interest, come find me at ClareKumar.com. I'd love to speak with you. Designing inclusive performance together will lead to the richest results.
I mean, the thing that I used to tell myself when I was anticipating a conversation was I had it all figured out that it was a real monologue in my head. And it's never a monologue, right? There are, as we were talking before, there are people that are not conversationalists. I seem to be born into a family that mostly is conversationalists. My mom is the queen of questions. So, but there are people who are less comfortable. Follow this line of inquiry with me a little bit with personality type, temperament, introversion. What do you say to people who are like, this is my least favorite modality, is to be talking to someone? I prefer text. I prefer writing. What are your thoughts on this, this conversation, which is my favorite format, but may not be everybody's?
I think it's okay to sort of, or at least I would encourage, say, I appreciate that. I understand and acknowledge we're all different. Certainly, I am more of an extrovert than an introvert. I love talking through things, so I understand that you don't. However, it is really important for both of us to be able to at least have a short conversation, which is why we'll keep these short. They don't have to be drawn out. But I think, this kind of communication It'll help for you to hear my intention. I like to hear your intention. And so I just ask that you stand in this for 15 or 20 minutes with me or 30 minutes once a week. That's all I'll ask. We can text the rest of the time. Because what I have discovered, and I've heard this from many, many introverts, is that I think we've allowed the introverts to weaponize their introversion at times to avoid having conversations. And I think the truth, if you look at what we know about psychology and human nature, is it doesn't matter where you're at on the introvert to extrovert spectrum. We all crave human connection. We all crave connection with other humans. Certainly we want to do it a little differently, but we all crave that. And we also know that face-to-face communication, or at least, eyeball to eyeball, if we're using video, there are levels of intimacy that are different depending on the type of conversation you're having and the way that you're having it. The closer you are to being face-to-face in physical proximity with one another, the closer you are to kind of the ideal maximum exchange that have an impact on connection. And so while they may say they don't like it, they do need it. And so I think creating a place that makes it safe and makes it small at first, and then over time, when it starts to feel helpful, I think what they're really trying to say is, most of these conversations I have at work are really uncomfortable for me, and they're unnecessary and unhelpful. And so I'd rather just avoid that. And so I can use my introversion as a way to avoid you wasting my time.
Yeah. This is just making me think of clean up your room. I don't see the point in that. Therefore, I don't want to do it, right? It's the value. To your point, the value has to be there. And you have to invite someone to trust you, to experience that dancing together for a period of time is going to lead to that value.
Yep. And if you have somebody that's really resistant, I mean, that's where I'd just be like, I'll tell you what, here's what I'd ask is commit to doing this with me for 8 weeks. And then at the end of 8 weeks, we're going to check in and talk about it. And
we'll check in again. They're like glazing over at this point.
At the end of our 8 weeks, we're going to check in about whether this is working for you or not, and how we can make it more effective for you. And if you're doing this right, if you're asking the great question, if you're listening, you're allowing them to talk about what matters to them, they're going to come to realize, like, this actually is valuable to me.
Yeah.
And then by the time you get to week 8, they're like, no, I'm okay. This is fine. Or they don't. And if they don't, at least you've had 8 weeks to kind of build a relationship to figure out something that works better.
Yeah. Have you seen that happen a bunch? Is there a percentage of people where you're like, this really doesn't work and they need to move to something else? And if so, what do they move to?
When that happens, which isn't particularly frequently, and I mean, so you asked earlier frequency. My go-to is you should start with, I think weekly is kind of a nice spot to start with. If you're working with people and you're managing people and you're responsible for their career and their performance, the fact that you wouldn't at least be checking in with them weekly seems like you're not doing your job personally. And that's what I've generally seen, is that anything longer than that, it's really hard to stay, I think, in good sync. There are situations, if you've been working together for years and years, or, there are situations where it makes sense. But that's usually what happens when you have someone that's like, this weekly thing is too much. Okay. Well, let's talk about, how about we negotiate that we'll do once a month, we'll do a one-on-one check-in, but then we need to do some kind of virtual check-in, using some kind of tool. Like, I'm going to send you a couple of questions. You send me the answer to those couple of questions. I'll send you some, if there's follow-up, but we can do it asynchronously if that's more comfortable for you. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting, I think it goes back to that CEO, right? Is that you have to find a way to build the relationship. And I talk about this in my training. I talk about this when I speak, is that time is the currency of relationships. And there's no shortcut, there's no hack. And as a leader, you have to build relationships with your people if you want to get the best from them. And so the only way that works is if you spend time with them. And so it's kind of, the other thing is it's a tool I've used, or a sort of, I guess, a mindset I've used with my kids, is I learned that if I want to maintain a relationship with my children, particularly as they get into teenage years,
Oh,
I have to be interested in what they are interested in.
yep.
Because if I get interested in what they're interested in, then they will allow me in to spend time with them. And in that time, we preserve our relationship. And so if you have one of these resistant folks, it's like, well, what would make it more comfortable for you, for us, when we do this, or when we do spend time together? What would make that work better for you? Would it be a different setting? Would it be using Zoom versus getting together in person? What makes it work? And let them drive some of that.
I love that, because I'm working on a TEDx talk right now. And one of the points I'm making is that comfort drives performance. And so a lot of times we're sabotaged by uncomfortable environments or processes or experiences. And exactly that, if you can invite that comfort, and there's a beautiful opening conversation there to learn something about, like, what makes you more comfortable. This is
Absolutely.
actually a segue into something I wanted to talk about you in more depth. In my experience now, I've been working with people as a productivity coach for a couple of decades now. And I notice there's wildly varying different ways to do things, which I adore. But there's also wildly varying self-awareness about the way people work and what they know about the way they work themselves. And so I created a questionnaire that helps people tune in a lot to what sets them up for success, and then be able to articulate it. And you were saying, the return to office push is so short-sighted. I believe it's these conversations that you're talking about, and this fundamental understanding of what keeps each other more comfortable, which is going to invite everyone's best performance. And the leaders in this conversation too, because the leader, to your point, might not have the toolkit, but might have also leaned on visible cues. For example, I could open my door and I could see my team, and I knew, I could just have those visual cues that Robert needed me to give me something, and Sylvia, and like they just had a different set of structure that was helping their brain remember all the things they needed to do. And I think in our world now, we have a lot of expectations of a leadership, but maybe not a lot of sympathy or even understanding or compassion for their role.
Agreed. And there's a lot in what you just said that it sparked a couple of things. I think one is, yes, that it's really hard. It was hard to be a manager and a leader. I mean, it's a challenging business. People are complicated and messy, and they have different styles and different. I mean, it is hard work, and we have under-equipped leaders for years and years and years. And so we should do a better job of that, right? There definitely is training needed on all fronts to create comfort for them in being able to have these conversations. I've been thinking about a lot lately as maybe just a realization. Part of it, yes, double click on the self-awareness piece. I am constantly shocked by how, like, we make assumptions that people know what they want. I mean,
Yes.
and I, like with your assessment, and as I looked at your assessment, what it made me think of was one of the practices that I recommend sometimes to teams is writing a personal user's manual.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just similar kinds of things. So that's something that gets you clarity about what your preferred work style is. And then you can share that with others, so that then you can kind of adapt to one another. But the thing that on a deeper level has been really interesting, I've been reflecting on lately, is when it comes to our ability to connect with other people. I think, and this has just been bubbling up, that there's a degree of how connected are we to ourselves? Like, how connected are we to who we are and what matters to us, and sort of how confident we are, where we sit in the world? Because I think that has a profound impact in my ability to step into that conversation with you, to be fully present with you, to allow you the space to go where you need to go without me needing to try to nudge you one way or the other, and follow you down that path, not being afraid of where it leads. Yeah. And we don't support either employees or managers, I don't think, really on that journey. And I think that's something that needs to change.
I think so too. And I don't know if you know Gabor Mate's work, The Myth of Normal.
Mhm.
But how sort of we're detaching and numbing out from our ability to connect to ourselves and to connect to self-compassion, which is now the fountain of compassion for others. So I think that engine is under threat. And unless we actually commit to tuning in, and I say tune in before you lean in, because there's so much commitment to doing and to getting the tasks done. There's not enough for team and the connection, like you said, to self or to others. So yeah, I think and I don't know how many leaders see it. When you talk about this stuff, do you get people going, "Oh my gosh, yes, we need to actually slow down and weave in some of this exhale
Well,
time."
they don't know. And that honestly is the connection to self is sort of I think that's a next frontier for me to figure out, because what I have found and just where I have been anchored for the last several years is in just embracing sort of this radical, it's sort of a radical acceptance of the reality that we are in a moment in time where every manager, no matter where you work, is probably time compressed. They're probably underskilled. They probably have more to do than they can handle.
Mm-hmm.
They're struggling to find time with their people. And
Mm-hmm.
so where I have been sort of thinking about and anchoring is, how can I give them tools
Mm-hmm.
to give them an accelerated way to get into the conversations that matter with their people,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can build a better relationship, help their people have a better experience. Hopefully everybody starts enjoying work more and having better impact. And then I think the phase after that then becomes, okay, as we're doing that and we start to have some space, then can we do some deeper work?
Mm-hmm.
And that we learn some skills through these like templated exercises or whatever, the 4 steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want a connection to feel like a recipe you're working through, or a check-in to feel like a recipe you're working through. But the reality is, if I don't know how to do it, that's super helpful to me to have that step until it becomes habit. And so that's where I have been. But I do think you're right. I don't think most leaders are looking or even aware of the impact or what's being lost by being trapped in this,
Mm-hmm.
Go fast, hustle culture where we don't slow down to reflect. We're not slowing down to build relationships and nurture one another. There's a cost. And I think we have a long ways to go there.
Yeah, I think there's endless opportunities, the way I like to look at it. But
Agreed.
that appetite to go there is under threat, continually under threat. And I think what I'm noticing as a business owner, and I started this business in 2005 part-time and went full-time in 2008, it's so much more complex now. Everything is more complex. The number of messaging channels, the number of payment systems, everything is amplified and expanded. And it's becoming almost overwhelming just to keep up. Never mind feel like you're managing well and leading. I think there's a lot of overwhelm for good cause. And I mean, AI might help us with some of that. I'm not sure. I think, as we've seen, we didn't they talk about, way back when we were going to get productivity gains with appliances, we'll be able to take more time off. I mean, we're struggling now. And at least there's a 4-day work week initiative to say, let's have more time off. But humans don't really seem to move in that direction. We seem to, especially in our culture, just seem to take, oh, I got more time, I'm going to give it right back, Well,
I think that unfortunately, we were born into a culture that was pointed tragically in that direction. And I think culturally that kind of is where we live now, is that we feel like we should be doing stuff all the time. And our kids are even raised in a, like, you should be busy all the time kind of culture. And so I think that's there. And the thing the one thing that I would say is giving me hope is that I am seeing, I mean, there are some examples of people who are breaking free from some of that and doing different things. Like we have a client that is a really large manufacturing organization that one of the executive leaders internally a number of years ago, I don't know kind of what drove him to it, but he kind of got to a point that he's like, we're just going to be obsessed with our associates and supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to start focusing on metrics around sort of their engagement, happiness, and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to stop worrying so much about the other production metrics. Like we're just not going to, I'm not going to get wrapped. And it's had phenomenal impact. It's like we didn't have to, like if we worried about the people and we took care of that, they did take care of the business. Everything else, like we started getting results that we had never seen before, and we weren't even aware they were happening because that's not what we were aiming towards. And so I think there are some pockets of leaders that are starting to, that do understand it. And I think it's just it's taking root, and it will take root. And I think this era of the reimagination of work is, I think, being like we're just in a moment of discovery and reinvention, I think. And I think it feels really messy right now. And I think because everybody is still, I shouldn't say everybody, I think leaders and I think a lot of employees are disoriented still, and they're not sure exactly what works best for them. And so they're trying to force it into kind of maladaptive models that are based on the old way and not really embracing the new way yet, or sort of we're kind of stuck in that interim period. And I think when we come out the other side, we're going to have learned a lot. And I think there's going to be some organizations that are doing work very, very differently with the humans at the center of it. So I'm super optimistic. I just think we're in a period of, we're kind of in the fog of the transition right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm very heartened by the younger generation, which seems to be more self-aware, and also has found their voice to speak up for what they want, and also defines life and what a rich life means much more broadly than being successful at work. So I think there's a natural evolution to more of that. But in some cases, it's going to take leadership either coming to see that or to just, move along as they will over time anyway. Right? There is a natural evolution underfoot. I was guilty of being the millennial 30 years ago, banging my head against a wall and being looked at like I had three heads, Yep. So I'm very excited by what I'm seeing in the younger generation and what they're standing up for, I would say.
Yeah. Agreed. And there's just, I think there's a lot of energy built up, a lot of, we've learned a lot, and we're in at least where I think we're at right now is, the pendulum had to swing way out to the one side during the pandemic, which was great because it sort of broke through a bunch of dogma and nonsense that had been confining us into a way of working that wasn't working, and we swung out. And so there's always, whenever there, it's action, reaction, right? So we're kind of in, I think, a swinging back a little bit. And there's, some traditional leaders that they're trying to make work look like what makes sense to them right now. And the markets will sort this out, right? I think the demands of the employee population over time will sort it out and pull it to something better. We have to ride this wave as we go. And I think do what we can to nudge leaders towards, at least gently, towards some aha moments. And what I try to do is just kind of, if I can sneak in and give them a way to accidentally end up in a more meaningful conversation with one of their people that then tells them something that they've not heard that way before, maybe that moves us a step in the right direction. So more conversation, I think, means more progress.
I'm totally with you. I think it's really about that. It's one-on-one conversation where you actually connect to someone else and you start to see things differently. I've seen this in conversations with CEOs that I've had too. And it's the only thing that I think smoothly dislodges false consensus effect, which is that bias where we think, Jason, you should like a pink wall just as much as I do, right? It's like, it makes no sense. So I think, I think if there are enough of us in the conversation and we're committed to encouraging conversation, then I think we'll start to see that shift. Jason, I want to thank you so much for joining me. And I want to invite you now, if there's a way you'd like people to find you, connect with you, and share in your work, where would they reach you?
Well, three quick ways. One is you can visit my website, which is just jasonlauritsen.com. You can spell my name, you can find it. And actually, if you put my name into the Googles, you're going to find lots of ways to find me. I try to as you know, Claire, we have to be easy to find. So
Yes.
website, LinkedIn, or you could email me at jason@jasonlauritsen.com. I love to hear from people. If you have questions, hit me up.
Awesome. Definitely hit Jason up. That's what I did. And after meeting you at, like I said, Work Human, that was an excellent conference for people that are interested in humans being at the center of work and some forward thinking. Thanks so much for joining me today and sharing your insights. Appreciate it.
Claire, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for all the work you're doing to make work better as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for spending time here. Check out happyspacepod.com for links to all the episodes, including on YouTube, our online community, and helpful tools for work that fits. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment on social media, or even better, drop a review. And please share with someone else who you know also deserves a happy space.